The break room smelled like burnt coffee and the same complaint it smelled like every Tuesday. Denise from billing was doing the math out loud again: car payment, insurance renewal, her son's braces, landing, the way it always landed, about $300 short. Carla Jennings nodded in the right places. She stirred sugar into coffee she wasn't going to finish and let her hand rest flat against her scrub pocket, where a folded printout sat against her hip like it weighed 40 pounds. She had read the confirmation number 11 times since 6 that morning. Nobody in this room knew her name was already sitting inside a number with 9 digits in it. "That's rough," she said, and meant it, and said nothing else. She finished her shift at 7, signed out, and drove home the long way, past the gas station where she'd bought the ticket 4 days earlier on a whim, because the coffee machine inside was broken and the register line was short. She didn't remember picking the numbers. She remembered being tired and wanting to get home to Eli's game. For days earlier, home had looked like this: a mortgage with $172,000 still owed on a house worth maybe $230,000. A checking account that lived somewhere between $6,000 and $7,000 depending on the week. A retirement account from the hospital, $41,000, that she checked twice a year and tried not to think about the rest of the time. An auto loan on Paul's truck, $14,000. A credit card that crept toward $5,000 every winter when the heating bill doubled and came back down every spring, like a tide. On paper, if you added the good numbers and subtracted the bad ones, Carla and Paul Jennings were worth somewhere around $86,000. Not broke. Not free either. Freedom, in that house, meant something specific. It meant Paul not answering his own phone on Sundays because it was always a customer with a check engine light and no money to fix it right. It meant Carla picking up night shifts because night differential added $4 an hour, and $4 an hour was Maya's orthodontist and Eli's cleats and, some months, $40 folded into an envelope for Renata, Carla's older sister, who was always one bad week from asking and always ashamed to ask. Nobody in the family called it a cage. They called it being responsible. But it worked the same way a cage works: you could see all the way to the edges of your life, and you knew exactly which walls you weren't getting past this year, or maybe next year, or maybe ever. Carla checked the numbers herself, twice, standing at the kitchen counter with the lights off because she didn't want to wake anyone before she was sure. Then she checked them a third time on her phone against the ticket, letter by letter. Then she sat down on the floor with her back against the cabinets, because her legs had stopped being reliable. What she did next mattered more than the win itself, and she didn't fully understand that yet. A lottery win this size comes with a choice most people never think about until they're holding it: take the money as an annuity over 30 years, or take it as a single lump sum, smaller but immediate. For a jackpot advertised at $600 million, the cash option worked out to something close to $288 million, roughly what the state actually had on hand to pay out today instead of over 3 decades. The government would take its share up front, 24% withheld automatically before she saw a dollar of it, with more owed later once an accountant worked out exactly where she landed. By the time the federal government finished taking its full cut, she'd be left with something in the neighborhood of $180 million. Texas didn't tax it further. Texas doesn't have a state income tax, and lottery winnings aren't treated differently. There was a second decision buried inside the first one, and it was the one that actually kept her up that night. Texas law allowed a winner of a prize this size to stay off the public record, not by hiding, not by lying to the state, but by claiming the prize through a trust instead of a name. The trust would be the winner of record. Carla Jennings would be the person who controlled it. 2 different facts, filed in 2 different places, and nobody outside a small circle would ever have to connect them. She woke Paul up a few minutes before midnight. He found her sitting at the kitchen table with the refrigerator door open, its glow the only light in the room, holding an old tin that used to hold his mother's recipe cards. "You're gonna wake the kids," he said, half asleep, reaching for water. She didn't answer right away. When she finally slid the tin across the table to him, her hands weren't steady, and he almost laughed, thinking it was some kind of joke, until he unfolded the paper inside and read the 6 numbers twice before his voice worked again. They didn't decide everything that night. But they decided one thing: sitting at that table at 1:45 in the morning, whatever came next, it would come through the trust, under a name that wasn't hers, and it would not come with an announcement. Not to the hospital. Not to the shop. Not, for now, to anyone in either of their families, including a sister $300 a week from the edge, sleeping 40 minutes away with no idea that the envelope of cash she sometimes got from Carla was about to look very small next to what her sister actually had. The lawyer they found, a woman 2 towns over who'd handled this kind of filing before, for people whose names never showed up in the news, set up what she called a continuance trust inside 11 days. Carla signed where she was told to sign. The claim went in under the trust's name. 3 weeks after that, on an ordinary Thursday, an account that had never held more than $11,000 at once received a wire transfer that made the number look like a typo. Nothing about the house changed that week. Carla worked her shift on Friday. Paul opened the shop at 8 like always and spent the morning under a Silverado with a bad alternator. But 2 things did change, and only Paul and Carla knew about either of them. The first was small. Carla paid off the balance on the credit card in full, the one that always crept up in winter, and didn't tell anyone why she suddenly had the room to do it. The second was smaller still, and it was the one that told her the plan was actually working. She sat in the hospital parking lot on her lunch break, opened the trust's account summary on her phone, and felt nothing close to the relief she expected. Just a number. Quiet, correct, and entirely hers to carry alone. Denise's suspicion never landed anywhere, but the truck did. Paul replaced the shop's ancient tow rig in March, paid cash, told the 2 guys who worked for him it was an insurance settlement from a fender bender nobody quite remembered him having. Nobody pushed. But small lies don't stay small, they multiply to cover their own tracks. A settlement needs a story. A story needs a date. A date needs to line up with something else you already said. Carla noticed how easily this came to him, and it worried her more than the truck did. For months, the 2 of them behaved exactly as they had before, which turned out to be its own kind of labor. Carla worked her shifts. Paul opened the shop at 8. They packed the same lunches, drove the same cars they'd always driven, sent Eli to school in the same beat-up cleats until the ones that needed replacing actually needed replacing. Nothing about the outside of their life had changed, and that was the point, and it was also more exhausting than either of them had expected. Somewhere around month 4, Carla understood that $180 million sitting in a trust with someone else's name on it had stopped being the hard part. She had solved for money. She had not solved for how to keep loving people while lying to all of them. That was the shift, and it happened on an ordinary Sunday, watching Renata unload groceries from a car with a check engine light Carla could have paid to fix in about 4 seconds. The cage she'd spent her whole life assuming was made of debt and hours and not enough turned out to have a second wall behind the first one. Money had bought her out of the first wall. It did nothing about the second. The second wall was made of every conversation she now had to plan in advance. The eviction notice came on a Wednesday. Renata called crying, doing the thing she always did when she was trying not to, talking too fast, too bright, circling the real sentence 3 separate times before she landed on it. 3 days. The landlord wasn't going to bend. She hated asking, she said, she always hated asking, and Carla stood in her kitchen with her sister's voice in one ear and, on the counter in front of her, a phone open to a balance with more zeros in it than Renata would see in 10 lifetimes. "Let me see what I can do," Carla said, which was the truth and also nothing like the truth. She wired $11,000 the next morning, enough for the back rent, the deposit on a smaller place, and 3 months of breathing room, and told Renata it was a bonus from a new staffing program at the hospital, a lie built fast and cheap because she didn't have time to build a better one. Renata believed it, or decided to, the way people do when believing is easier than doubting someone who just saved them. It should have felt like enough. For a while it did. But money placed into a relationship changes the shape of the relationship, whether or not anyone admits it out loud. Renata started calling more. She started asking, gently, whether the hospital's program might have room for anyone else, whether Carla could ask around. Each question was small and reasonable on its own. Stacked together, they were a debt Carla hadn't priced in, not money, but explanations she didn't have and couldn't give, coming due a little more each week from a sister who had no idea she was standing on the edge of something enormous and reaching for it in the dark. It came apart on a Sunday in September, the way most secrets do, not through a confession, but through an envelope left in the wrong place. Renata had come by to return a casserole dish and found the mail stacked on the counter while Carla was in the shower. Near the bottom of the stack was a statement addressed to the Bluebonnet Continuance Trust, care of Carla Jennings, trustee. She wasn't snooping. She was just looking for her dish. Carla came downstairs to find her sister at the kitchen table with the tin, the same tin, pulled down off the shelf where Carla still kept the original folded printout, some instinct she'd never examined, open in front of her, 6 numbers from that first night sitting next to a bank statement with more digits than either of them had words for. A bonus from the hospital, Renata said. Not a question. There was a version of this moment where Carla kept lying, and the lie probably would have held, because Renata wanted to believe it more than she wanted to know the truth. There was another version where she told her everything and risked the story reaching people who had no reason to carry it carefully. She chose a third thing, which took longer to say and cost her more. She told Renata the truth, all of it, and then asked for exactly one thing back. Not silence forever. Not a performance of not knowing. Just this, that whatever Renata now knew about her sister's life stayed between the two of them, the way it always should have been able to, if trust had ever been the easy part. If you've ever wondered what you'd actually do in that kitchen, keep the story simple, or let one more person all the way in, it's worth sitting with honestly. Most people get the answer wrong until they're the one holding the tin. Renata didn't tell anyone. 11 months later, that fact still surprised Carla more than the money ever had. The tin went back on the shelf in October, and by December it had stopped being the place where a secret lived and started being, more simply, the place where the truth was kept, a different thing, it turned out, than she'd understood the night she first slid it across the table to Paul. Carla still works the night shift twice a month, not because she needs the $4 an hour anymore, but because she isn't ready yet to explain to the hospital why she'd be leaving, and some kinds of readiness can't be bought. Paul still opens the shop at 8. The truck outside is nicer than it used to be, and nobody has asked why in over a year. Some Sunday afternoons, Renata comes by, and the two of them sit at the same table, and sometimes Carla takes the tin down just to look at it, not because she needs to check the numbers anymore, but because it's the only object in the house that remembers exactly how much her life has changed, and exactly how much of it, on the outside, still looks like it hasn't. She still hasn't told anyone else. She isn't sure she ever will. But for the first time since that Thursday in the parking lot, the number on her phone doesn't feel like something she's carrying alone. It feels like something she chose to set down, carefully, in exactly one other pair of hands.